It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Shout out to my channel sponsor, NogiBJJGear.com. Go check them out for rash guards, shorts, spats, all kinds of training gear. Don't forget to use my code Ramsey10 for a 10% discount off everything. Now on to the question. Our friend Matthew says this: how do you go about teaching tacit knowledge? For example, I am not a big guy, and during my early training, most other people in my club were all bigger and stronger than me. During sparring, they would often use various throws and takedowns due to the size disparity. As a result of this, I developed a knack for resisting such techniques. Not absolutely by any means. When I am asked by those I am training or training with, I struggle to explain beyond principles of feeling their weight distribution, reading their movements, etc. Can this knowledge be taught, or must they experience and develop it independently? Tacit knowledge. Okay. Essentially what that means is, I don't know how to teach this technique yet. I understand exactly what you mean. There are all these little details of movement that we do not know how to articulate or how to teach yet. Some people call it invisible Jiu-Jitsu. The little details about weight distribution. I was teaching a technique the other day, a triangle choke escape, because some of my students were asking, what's the best triangle choke escape? And there are a bunch of them, and one of my favorites, one of the highest percentage ones, I also found it to be the most difficult one to teach, because it's all about weight distribution, and if you're off by a little bit, it unbalances you and you get swept. But if you get the right feel for it, super easy. And I kind of groaned inside of me a little bit like, oh man, this is going to be hard to teach because we got some relatively new beginners here. And that's one of the problems, is beginners are still learning how to move their hands and feet in the right places, let alone how to distribute their weight right in the center, as opposed to sticking their head a little bit over the mat or whatever. But I had an epiphany as I was teaching this technique. I was working with this guy and he wasn't getting it, and he started asking more questions like, well, you're doing it and it's working, I'm doing it and it's not working, what's the difference? And I thought about it very seriously. How do I teach this? And I realized, after I don't know how many years of attempting to teach this technique, some people would get it, some people wouldn't, I realized a much, much better way to teach it. And that epiphany was, whoa, teaching is really, really dynamic. When people start teaching, they often copy, they parrot their teacher. They show what they were taught. That's the traditional way. The teacher says, move your hand like this. Exactly like that. And always do it that way and no different. Or maybe your teacher gives an analogy. Doing this is like pulling on a rope, or some nonsense like that. And so you teach your students, it's like pulling on a rope when you do that. And maybe that analogy clicks with them, and maybe they're just confused, like, a rope, what the heck does that mean? That doesn't help me. It's still not working, no matter how much I think about pulling on a rope. But I had an epiphany while teaching this triangle choke escape, that instead of focusing on the language that I was so used to using, which was like, get your weight in the center, that was confusing them. And so I focused on what the rest of my body was doing. And when I expressed the movement differently, move sideways, they were like, oh, why didn't you say that in the first place? And suddenly, boom, it worked and everybody got it. We so often confuse ability with, like, fighting ability with teaching ability, or fighting ability with coaching ability, or teaching ability with coaching ability, and they're not the same thing. Those are very, very different crafts. Teaching is the ability to convey information and knowledge and experiences to other people. It's a radically different thing than fighting, man. There are a lot of great fighters out there who are absolutely lousy teachers. Everybody should know this by now. Everybody should know that. And not every teacher is good at teaching every technique. Like, I had a student come up to me yesterday, ask me questions about the cross-collar choke, really basic fundamental Jiu-Jitsu movement. And he was explaining the trouble he was having catching people with a cross-collar choke, and he, for the most part, was doing everything right. We tried to fix a couple of details and so on. And I realized something about that particular technique. I can do that technique like clockwork. But teaching another person who is struggling with that technique to do it like clockwork it's an investment of time. And out of all the techniques that I know, out of all of the techniques that I'm able to teach, I'm definitely not at the black belt teaching level of teaching the cross-collar choke. The triangle choke? Yeah, man. Supreme Grandmaster right here at teaching that technique. But a cross-collar choke, a technique I am just as able to perform against live resisting opponents fighting back. Easy work. Teaching that technique, that simple technique, that basic technique. Troubleshooting, problem solving with that one. That one got me. That one made light bulbs go off in my head. There must be a better, more efficient way to go about this. I love going to fundamentals classes with different coaches to see the different ways that they teach the same things. So I'm not so concerned about how to do the technique. I'm more concerned, how do I teach this technique better? How do I make it click for everybody and not just one or two guys? Tacit information, tacit knowledge in fighting. It's not really tacit, it's just a lack of communication skills. It's a lack of vocabulary to express those ideas. I had a high school English teacher who would often use this quote, "The more words you know, the more thoughts you can think." And I thought, that doesn't sound quite right. And I reworked that idea in my mind until I came out with this one: the more words you know, the more thoughts you can express. And teaching martial arts is not just about the vocabulary of language, it's about the vocabulary of movement. And so teaching, tacit knowledge, if you will, is about increasing the number of thoughts that you can express through increasing your movement vocabulary as well as your verbal vocabulary. One thing that can help: take videos of yourself as you train, as you do the technique, as you spar, and watch those and review them and ask questions. Had a student the other day, and he was drilling a technique on both sides. And on the right side, perfect. On the left side, it just wasn't happening. He was doing just one little thing, a little bit off. And it wasn't working. Man, it was not working. And he didn't get it, and it was difficult to explain from my first-person perspective to his first-person perspective what could be seen easily from a third-person perspective. So I told him, get out a camera, film it from a third-person perspective so that you can see firsthand exactly what is happening differently on the left side versus the right side. Because it's subtle, but as soon as you look at it from a third-person perspective, you will see it and you will know how to fix it. So a lot of the times, man, teaching the tacit knowledge is just a matter of perspective. As you might feel you're doing some little tiny little ninja move that's imperceptible, when in reality, someone who is really good at film studies could pick that apart instantly just by watching you from a third-person perspective. So film yourself. Hope that helps. Good luck with your teaching and your martial arts training. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.